Chapter 1 I don't own Naruto or this fanfic. A simple solution to their problems, let's get married. Okay, it was not how he had planned to say it, definitely not this rushed and abrupt, certainly nothing as he had rehearsed repeatedly in front of his mirror since a few days. But the words were out and could not be retracted now. Uzumaki Naruto nervously shot a sideways glance at his best buddy, his long-term pal, his timeless confidant, gauging her reaction in trepidation. Albeit, buddy, and pal, did not really do justice to the, in his mind, image of feminine perfection which his eyes furtively scanned. Slender, well-toned frame topped by the pinkest hair he had ever seen in his life, face alight by the brightest green eyes he had ever come across, the lure which had never ceased to turn male heads in admiration, whether in Konoha or elsewhere, his own being on top of the list, though he made sure never to do it in a too leery way, least that she noticed it and pounded him to a paste. Yes, not to forget her scary temper, or the monstrous strength that had only increased with time. And the name that she had acquired for herself during the past years, having earned respect and admiration nationwide, adding to her appeal. Yes, her, his best friend, and the one his heart had set on since as long as he could remember. The two were tiredly sprawled on the lush green grassy ground under the shade of a wide oak tree, exhausted and battered from their 2 hours training. It was barely 8 o'clock in the morning and the summer sun was already blazing hot in the spotless blue sky, but the trickle of sweat which Naruto felt running down his back had nothing to do with the heat. Said pal turned her head almost idly to eye him, calm and cool, definitely not the reaction that Naruto had been apprehending. He had been more imagining something in the line of a yell of, "Have you gone out of your mind or what?" Haruno Sakura contemplated the blonde silently, barely fazed, used as she was to the never-ending, outrageous suggestions of her lifelong dunce of a friend. She had since long ceased to be dumbfounded by his ever-extravagant proposals, it was simply a waste of her energy. It was a while since the pink-haired head medic Nin had come to the solemn conclusion that Uzumaki Naruto would get wrinkled, toothless, hairless and knobbly with old age and still be the most unpredictable, baka ninja of Konoha and would die being the #1 prankster, ever. Being his best friend, she had heard and seen it all from the front seat row. Oh yes, she had. From his, Sakura-chan, let's play a prank Tsunade Ba-chan today, and the utterly pissed former Godime had found all her stack of sake bottles to be filled with sugared water, resulting in the famous bellow that had resonated throughout Konoha and a chase which had ended some impressive craters. To his, Sakura-chan, let's have another go in unveiling Kakashi-sensei's mask, and the poor old man, well, old by shinobi standards, had the shock of his life when the two very adult and insanely strong former students of his had spent the day trying to get that mask down. Kakashi has laid down on his bed that night feeling more bone-weary than he had been during the Fourth War, though his face's dignity had been spared as at the last moment, the two having had mercy on him and refrained from coercing him to remove the mask. And there was the day when the blonde had claimed that Konoha was too quiet and boring and had dragged her to the Hokage monument to aid him in painting the 6 Hokage faces with huge mustaches and beards, to the delight of the most cheerful inhabitants of Konoha and outrage of the stuck-up bunch, and getting some poor genins to clean the mess days later. Oh, these were only some of his outrageous suggestions of adventure, to cheer the day, as he called them. What irked Sakura in all this was that she found herself participating more than often in these pranks. So many times Sakura had somewhat, almost despite herself and not really knowing how, found herself following the Uzumaki in one of his prankster adventure, exultingly putting the what-ifs aside and leaving it on him to deal with the consequences later, knowing that he would always found a way out. And he always did. But, she had yet to hear this one though. Marriage proposal. Friends do not propose marriages to friends. And they were friends, best friends, only. He had never made any suggestion that would threaten their solidly bonded friendship. Heck, he had even stopped pestering her for dates since a decade now, though they had lunches and dinners more than often per week, but it was never under the banner of date, or anything more than friendship. A frown marred her brow as her mind slowly assimilated his proposal. She pursed her lips. If it was a joke, she failed the hilarity of it. The next instant, her face began to darken. When would he put a filter from his brain to his mouth and limit what he blurts out, the baka? Naruto immediately noticed the signs and realized that he was rapidly losing his ground, the dark face would be rapidly followed by a vein ticking out on her temple, and the temper of hers would explode, and she would explode him. It was how she usually worked, especially when dealing with him when he riled her. React first, think later. Admittedly, it took much more now to get her to a boiling point than what it used to take years earlier, and it only happened when he was in a particular mood of pushing her buttons just to get a reaction out of her. For now, though, he needed to be able to lay out all his reasons first while he was still in a state to do it, so that she would have all the facts in hands when she would eventually give the proposal a serious consideration later, as he definitely knew she would. He quickly scrambled into a sitting position. "Hear me out at least before you punch me out into the walls of Konoha," he pleaded hastily. Sakura maintained her dark stare on him. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain yourself," she growled in a tone which certainly did not bode anything good for him, and it was his cue to set off. He needed to be quick. "I'm in a fix and I need help," he started hurriedly. "Some members of the council have been really nagging me lately. It had started since months now, but this past week had been worse. They are getting really persistent and on my nerves." Impatient green eyes urged him to come to the point, and he took a breath. "They are demanding that I get married." One pink eyebrow rose incredulously at the words. "Married?" she repeated. She slowly got to a sitting position, her hands supporting her weight. Naruto nodded. He had her full, serious attention now. "According to them, as the leader of the village, I'm obligated to set the good example and get married," he grumbled unhappily. "They feel it's not a good image that I'm projecting as Hokage to be still unmarried at this age." She opened her mouth, but foreseeing what she was about to say, he hurried on. "Tsunade Ba-chan was over that age when she became Hokage, so it was not a problem, whereas they insist that I'm at the age to settle down and not to still be frolicking about." He quoted the exact words that had been used. "One of them even implied that I may have other sexual orientations and that's why I'm still unmarried," he spluttered, still outraged at the memory. He claimed that my obsession to get Sasuke back was quite weird. He had wanted to throttle that old sly geezer. And for them being of different orientation is, of course, even more out of question for a Hokage. Sakura managed to hold a straight face even as her mind was filled with images of Naruto being with another man in that way. She quickly dragged her scandalized yet reluctantly fascinated mind back to his words, as he continued. "I'm at the end of my patience having to endure this pressure from them. I'm simply fed up with their constant pestering and finding excuses to find faults in me being the Hokage," he sighed, raking a hand through his hair. The blue cerulean eyes had darkened with frustration. Despite being a hero and loved by the village, there had still been a small group of the council, very small, thankfully, but still there, who had opposed his ascension to the Hokage. Until this day, they put all their effort to try to get him down. He usually managed to look over their attempts of low blows, but he was finding himself running out of excuses and his patience was running thin at their increasing demands about his single marital status. He looked at her dejectedly. "I really don't have the energy or time, or the inclination," he thought to himself, "to go wife searching and selecting. At the same time I want to get rid of the flow of daughters, in which I have absolutely no interest at all, that some parents are throwing at me since my ascension to the Hokage title. Shouldn't that be the solution to your problem?" Sakura interrupted. "Why don't you simply choose someone from among them? And what was that strange pang?" "Sakura-chan, I'm not interested in getting married, least in arranged marriage and nobility." Her eyebrows shot up at that. Wasn't that the whole issue, his getting married? "I was thinking about doing a blank marriage," he said. At the dawning comprehension on her face, he continued. "I thought we could do a blank marriage," he pointed to her and him. "It would only be platonic, like being flatmates," he hastily specified. "Something in the duration of 2 years will suffice. It will allow me to be able to shut those difficult council's geezer's mouth, even if momentarily, and have some peace. But if ever you want to end it before the 2 years, for whatever reason, we will cease the arrangement immediately, no questions or bad feelings about it, I promise." She stared incredulously at him. "And you think the council will look kindly upon a separation when the time comes? They are demanding marriage, they did not specify that it need to be a lifelong one. Couples, even the best ones sometimes, get separated. And anyway, I'll tackle that issue when the time comes, at least I'll have a breather for the time being. I desperately want them off my back, even for a short while. And who knows, maybe Konohamaru will manage to kick my ass and gain the Hokage title by then, so my impending separation will not matter to the council anyway." She was silent, too taken aback to say anything, not even smiling at the Konohamaru comment since they both knew it would take much more than what Konohamaru had right then to defeat Naruto. "I thought since you don't have anybody," he ventured nervously. She shot him an indignant glare at that. At least, not anybody that I know about, right now, he hastily rectified. Nevertheless, being her best friend, he was well aware of all the details of her social life and knew that she did not have anyone in that way. He had always made it a point to look after her and he knew everybody she frequented, not that he would have come in her way had she been interested in anybody, her happiness was primordial to him, but apart from the one, very brief story with Hisagi, a Waves country medic nin who came to Konoha for a one-week exchange the previous year, she has never gone out with anybody in a romantic capacity. Looking at her pleadingly, he murmured, I thought of you because we are best friends and have been teammates for so long, we are familiar and used to each other's ways, it will be easier to cohabit and will avoid awkwardness. Sakura frowned, her thoughts whirling at what he was suggesting. Looking at those pleading blue eyes, she decided to humor him for a brief second. And why did you think for one moment that I'll agree to this arrangement? He straightened his back immediately and looked at her earnestly. There was hope, he thought, and with a deep breath, pulled forth all his best negotiating skills. Well, firstly, I really need help here. Like in really. And you are my best friend, and best friends help each other. She grunted. Yes, indeed, she would do anything to help him, as he would do too. It would also solve your huge problem of residence right now. You won't need to look for another apartment, and think about the saving you would be able to make to eventually buy a place of your own, he went on. Sakura frowned thoughtfully. Yes, her residence problem was a major issue for her right now. Her old, sweet landlady had recently passed away and the apartment building has been passed on to her horrible nephew. Said man had immediately decided to double the rent rate of the apartments of the building. Sakura, along with the other residents, had tried to negotiate a compromise but to no avail. Even Naruto, as the Hokage, had not been able to do anything about it since legally the man had the right to change the contract, as the ownership had changed, as was the law of Konoha. Sakura simply could not afford the new exorbitant rent. She had a comfortable salary as head medic nin, but she did not want to throw more than half of it away in a ridiculously expensive apartment. So, she was currently faced with the immense task of having to look for another place to move into as fast as possible. And with Akemi-san, you will be relieved of tiring housework and think about the warm, homemade, delicious meals that will always await you at the end of a long, tiring day, he added. Trust Naruto to think in terms of his stomach, Sakura could help rolling her eyes. Akemi was Naruto's middle-aged, wonderful housekeeper, whom Sakura herself had recruited for him, and she had to admit that the lady could cook. Blue eyes danced mischievously as the blonde continued, and living together, you will have easier access to nag me to you heart's content. He tried to keep a straight face as he said that. Hey, I don't nag you that much, she immediately exclaimed, indignant. He eyed her with the look that said, really? Who are you kidding? She nagged him for everything. About his eating, she was always checking with his housekeeper that he had healthy meals with lot veggies. About his health, God forbid if he had dared acquire a wound or take unnecessary risks. About his working hours, she would scold him if he stayed too late at the office. About him drinking alcohol, he very rarely did, not liking the thing, but the couple of times she had caught him faintly inebriated she had glowered at him and lectured him about liver damage and whatnot. About his finances, she would always caution him about being careful, the list goes on. There had even been this one time when she had made a comment about his undergarments. He had been in her office for a vaccine, and when he had lowered the waist of his pants to bare his hip, nothing indecently exposed, she had looked at the partly exposed waistband of his boxers and had remarked something in the line of, I do hope you wear fresh, clean boxers every day. He had turned to look at her incredulously. Surely she had not. Oh, but she had. It seemed as if she had realized the ludicrousity of her comment as well and had turned pink. I'll pretend that you have not said that, he had simply replied dryly and she had readily agreed. Sometimes, Naruto felt that his mom had come from the heavens to have a chat with Sakura, discussing the things that he needed to be nagged about, since Sakura nagged him for almost the exact things his mother had lectured him about while he had met her briefly in the Fox realm. Well, someone has to look after him, Sakura thought defensively. He worked and cared so dedicatedly for their village, even at the detriment of his own personal life, the least she could do was ensure that he was properly cared for in turn. And surely I don't nag that much, she protested to herself, huffing. And, he continued, coming back to his persuasion task, knowing that the next one would rile her even more, it's not as if we are getting any younger. Won't you feel better about shutting up those relatives of yours, even if for a short time? Yes, Sakura's relatives, especially on her paternal side, did have the tendency to point out her still unmarried status each they met. Luckily for her, they rarely came to visit, but when they did, it was a nasty time for Sakura. Then, belatedly realizing his jab about her age, Sakura bristled threateningly, just as Naruto had known she would. Hey, we're only 25 years old. 25 years is old for a shinobi, he pointed out. See how everybody in our group had already settled down. It was true. Ino was happily married to Shikamaru and unknown to anybody yet, was 2 months pregnant, as Sakura had found out from her test's results the previous day. Choji was married to a girl from his clan and already had a 1-year-old son. Tenten was married to Neji, Hinata was married to another Hyuga and had a 2-year-old daughter, Kiba got recently engaged to a girl from his clan, Lee had a long-term girlfriend Amy, a lovely Junin, Shino was married to a member of his own clan. Heck, even Sai had a fast girlfriend. As for Sasuke, the guy already had 2 little Uchihas running about. Yes, their former teammate had been that busy to build up his clan, but it was no surprise really, as the guy had openly announced, at the age of 12, to have the burning ambition to rebuild his clan. Naruto and Sakura had succeeded, together, against all odds, to bring their wayward teammate home after the war. But it had not been the happily reunited Team 7, as they had always dreamed. Sasuke had changed too much beyond recognition for that. The only thing that had prevented a punishment of execution for his past deeds had been his major role in bringing down Madara and thus ending the war. Added to that, the veto of the daimyo of Fire Country, who did not want to see such a prestigious and powerful clan as the Uchiha disappear, had brought Sasuke punishment down to home imprisonment and stripping him of his powers for 7 years. He had stonily accepted his sentence. He had continued to coldly refuse his teammates back in his life, remaining frigidly aloof and withdrawn despite Naruto's and Sakura's effort as they visited him at the Uchiha compound during his imprisonment. After a while, the two had reduced their visits, leaving the Uchiha him to his own things. Now, it was only Naruto who still went to visit him. Sakura had since long ceased to, not knowing what to say in his presence anymore. But the two took happiness in the fact that at least Sasuke was back home and not driving further into a dark, hatred-filled, lonely world. Since Sasuke had been allowed to marry during his home imprisonment, he had taken a noble as wife, and his 2 sons had been born shortly after, within 2-year intervals. It has been 1 year since the Uchiha had been given his powers back, though the close monitoring of his movements still stayed. Naruto had proposed him to get back in Konoha ranks, but Sasuke had refused to resume his life as a shinobi. The Uchiha fortune released to him had ensured that he was well off financially, and he had preferred to remain secluded, tending to his properties. So, to sum it up, Naruto and Sakura were the only two to still be single out of their group of friends. For Naruto, the reason was simple, really. For him, no other girl had ever counted. It had always been Sakura and it would always be her, and if could not be her, it would be no one else, he had decided long ago. He was not the first one to choose to be single, his 2 senseis, Jiraiya and Kakashi being some prime examples, and he would not be the last one to prefer a single life to a compromised life with someone other than the one of his heart. He refused to live a lie, to force himself to be with someone for whom he did hold such feelings for, as he had gently told Hinata years ago, after having given a pitifully short, failed attempt at a relationship with the Hyuga heiress. It would have been unfair to her and he would not be able to live with himself. He had never approached Sakura with his feelings because somehow, that opportunity seemed to have been missed as more years had passed. They had settled so deeply and comfortably in their close friendship that it had gotten hard to take the slightest risk to breach that bond. He had been terrified to do anything to put that bond in jeopardy. What they had already was so strong, what they share transcends anything, they were as close as 2 human beings could be, excluding being lovers. He strived to be happy with what he had, preciously cherishing her affection and bond above. But now, with this issue about the council rising, things could take a different turn. It was a far-fetched thought and he did not want to dwell into it, but still, one could hope. Coming out of his musings, he met affronted green eyes glaring at him. Sakura was visibly annoyed. Whatever their friend's status, poking her about her age had been a bad thing to do, and her eyes narrowed threateningly at the blonde Hokage. So, this how you've come to this utterly, most ridiculous solution I've ever heard in my life, she growled, crackling her fists. Your 1 minute is long over, she warned. Sakura-chan. Naruto wailed, quickly scrambling to his feet and running away for life, knowing that nothing more could be said now. The citizens of Konoha did not react when they heard the yell of their young Rokudime. There could be only one person who could make him yell for dear life like that, well, two, if they counted the former Godime, but the retired woman rarely did that these days. So, that would be their head medic Nin, they all thought. The villagers just shook their heads knowingly as the growl of their monstrously powered head medic Nin followed soon after. Being used to it, they happily continued with their occupations of the day, safe in the knowledge that they were dearly cherished and protected by their mighty Hokage as the front-line defense, and if ever the enemy had, by fluke, managed to get past that impeccable defense, they had the best medic of the whole 5 nations to repair them back to health. XXXXX. Just as Naruto had known she would, Sakura gave the strange proposal a thorough thought later that night, alone at home after her shift at the hospital. It was rare that Naruto asked her for serious help, and she gave the request its due consideration, because she would do anything to help her best friend. One thing he had been right, it was not as if she was taken that it would prevent her from accepting this request, nor did see anything like that to happen in the near future. She had spent so many years chasing after her one-sided love for Sasuke, a couple of years further to come to terms with the fact that her feelings were and had always been futile and would never be returned, and some more years to get used to this reality and get herself completely purged of any residual feelings she had for the Uchiha, that by the time she was done with it all she had lost her romantic outlook of life and had been too wary of looking for a relationship anymore. Not forgetting that there had always been this stormy and unexplained thing she had for Naruto all the time, feelings which had remained unsolved, since they had, on an unspoken, common decision, settled into a close friendship instead. It was a friendship that she valued above anything, and friendship which neither of them had ever tried to change, keeping it safe and cherished. The only man she had been acquainted with in a little more than friendly capacity had been Hisagi, and it was not as if there had been any major involvement or feelings shared. Knowing that it would be only for a few days, both of them had decided to keep the story light and pleasant. Not that she was moping about her lack of love life, she was very content with what she had. Her career was more than thrilling, and she had a swarm of great friends, with Naruto on the top of her list, for her to be happy. So, she was free of any present or forthcoming relationship restriction to consider Naruto's request. But though Naruto had made it sound so simple, typical of him, he always made things sound much easier, as impossible seemed to be absent in his vocabulary. Sakura, being the meticulous and brainy one, could see many loopholes in his plans. The major one was her own dormant, complicated feelings which she had buried deep within her. It was definitely not a decision to take lightly, and Sakura remained awake until the wee morning hours, turning the prospect all around in her mind. XXXXX. A couple of days later, Sakura found herself giving the proposal another serious thought as she faced her new landlord on the threshold of her apartment's door. She was trying desperately to hold on to her calm, her hands curled into a tight fist, curbing the urge to punch the middle-aged man as the sleazy being ran his eyes over her form as soon as she opened her door. It was the 3rd time he had come to her apartment for the past 2 weeks, and his revolting attitude seemed to increase each time, seeing as he did not even attempt to hide the lecherous sweep of his eyes over her person. Can't hit him, she chanted like the mantra in her head, her jaw clenched. Think about the consequences, the dark, cold prison, she insisted to herself, for she would be definitely imprisoned if she hit a civilian. He would simply die, or at worst suffer permanent damage if she landed a single punch on him. So, Sakura-san. The way he drawled her name made her shudder in fury. Have you come to a decision? He asked in his nasal voice which grated on her nerves, the small beady eyes running over her again. Her fists clenched tighter. Legally, I have until the end of the month to give you my decision, she snapped, so I still have 4 weeks left. I just came to remind you about it he started, but Sakura had had enough. I'll see you at the end of the month, she grated and slammed the door on his face. She felt like screaming as she leaned against the door, cursing the predicament she was in for the umpteenth time. Looking around at the beloved, small but cozy living room which opened to the kitchen and dining room, she again despaired that she had to leave the place which she had called home for the past 7 years since she had left her parents' house. Good apartments were very rare to find these days. More and more shinobis were getting their own place at earlier age, so the demand for housing in Konoha had peaked during the past years, resulting in prices getting soaring high. She, along with the help of Ino, had been scrounging the town in the look of a decent place. The ones she could afford were scrawny, and the one she liked was not within the budget she had allocated for lodging, unless she decided to squeeze in her other expenses. She had considered sharing with a flatmate, but all her friends were settled, most with families of their own, and the idea of sharing with a total stranger did not appeal to her. The image of the one-storied, bamboo shingles roofed house, surrounded by a small, lush green garden that was the Hokage residence was very, very appealing right then, house which she herself had a huge hand, if not total hand, in decorating when the Rokudaime was given his Namikaze heritage at the age of 18. But still, lodging should not play too importantly on her decision, it was their friendship which could be in jeopardy if all this turned sour, and she did not want to risk that for anything. XXXXX later in the week, Sakura drearily slumped her form into her parents' couch after the delicious and elaborate lunch cooked by her mother. She longed to escape to her apartment, but she could not. Her mother's pleading glance forced her to curb that urge. It was her father's birthday and she had told her parents, since a week now, that it was her day off, so she could not find a valid excuse of not staying over for longer. She rarely had time to visit as it is, busy as she was as medic nin, so the rare times she could manage it and for such special occasions she always ensured that she stay over as long as possible. She usually loved to visit her parents and always enjoyed the pampering and fabulous cooking of her mother, but her averse to be present on this specific day stemmed from the presence of her out-of-town paternal relatives, her grandmother and her two aunts. The one who were always riling her about her still single status. They were from a civilian town, a day travel away from Konoha, and had come for the birthday. So, currently, Sakura felt like a grumpy, sulking kid, forced to behave properly around adults, dreading when they would start on her case. And she was not disappointed, for as soon as all the family gathered in the living room and were seated, it started. So, still no husband, Sakura, roared her old grandma, sitting opposite to her. The old lady may look fragile at 70 years old, but it was just a false image as she was a real paragon, with a forceful personality and unbearably, stubbornly pushy when she wanted. Being that they met very rarely, Sakura was not particularly close to her or her aunts, and the fact that they did not understand her choice for being a shinobi did not help at all. Who would want such a, Aunt Mai paused voluntarily, running a critical eye over Sakura, muscular wife anyway, sighed the buxom woman dramatically, eyes lingering pointedly at the large forehead before falling down to the modest bust and the slim hips of her niece. Men like their women to be more feminine and less domineering, Sakura. Sakura scowled, retaining a snarky reply and held to her temper, a vein ticking at her temple. Yes, her forehead had not magically shrunk in size, neither had her bust miraculously expanded since her late teens, and her slim frame was not hotly voluptuous, her voice and temper when raised was anything but dulcet, but she had come to accept and like her looks as they were, and her temperament could not be helped, and her relative's words was not about to change that. She took a deep breath to calm herself. Her grandmother and aunts were not bad people, really, they were just very set in their own ways about the role of women. Being civilians, the idea of a woman being a kunoichi and not married at the age of 16 and produce kids at 17, like her cousins had, was alien and incomprehensible to them, and in their world, women were sweet and subservient and agree with everything their husbands say. Sakura had great difficulty in imagining her dragonic grandmother being sweet or obedient, though. She painfully swallowed her ire and was still struggling to get a polite response out, when her father chuckled loudly. Well, a very strong and deserving man would like her for what she is, he said affectionately, winking at his daughter. Sakura smiled a thanks to him. He had always advised her to take the family comments with a grain of salt, but Sakura still always got riled up by them. Nothing less for my princess, he added proudly. Her mother nodded in agreement. Sakura is put on the same league as the esteemed Godaime in terms of medic nin, she has already earned the respect of the whole village, even further nations, she said proudly. Sakura did not miss the wistful glint that entered her mother's eyes and almost rolled her eyes. The older Haruno might be taking her side in front of their relatives, but whenever Sakura was home, she would always nudge her about any prospective son-in-law. Her grandma huffed. Well, she may be successful, but still without a man to return home to. Now look at underscore. Sakura groaned and resolutely closed her mind to the rest of the conversation, having enough for the day. It was always the same story. Why did it feel like someone from above was having a good laugh by throwing out the reasons that Naruto had enumerated to support his proposal? She thought crossly. Sakura reached her decision the very next day. In all logics and rationality, there were hundreds of reasons that this was the most foolish, reckless thing to do, but the fact that Naruto needed her help trumped all other reasons. The rest was all side benefits, which really were a solution to her immediate problems, as he had said. So, Sakura found herself finally wanting to take the plunge and accept his unusual proposal. She found Naruto chatting with two junins of the administrative staff at the Hokage Tower's lobby when she went to look for him during her lunchtime. She observed him for a moment, taking in his tall frame. He topped her by half a foot now, the face more angular now, the blonde hair still as shaggy and unruly as ever, held by the Hittite, the maroon Hokage robe suggesting the lean but powerful physique, his face alight as he laughed loudly at what one of the junins said. She suddenly felt nervous about what they were about to do, her hands clammy as she shakily tucked away a stray lock of hair which had escaped her mid-back length braid. Drawing a deep breath, she squared her shoulder determinedly. She had made a decision, and would stick to it. Naruto finally noticed her standing at the entrance. With a hurried apology, he took leave of the two junins and made his way in her direction. His eyes were hesitant as he walked towards her. They had not met since his proposal, so he was wary of her reaction, but his smile was the usual bright as he greeted her. Sakura-chan. Sakura nodded back, remaining standing where she was and waited for him to reach her side, within discreet talking distance. Are we having lunch together? He asked, trying to recall whether they were to meet on that day. Most of the time, he was the one to go to get her from the hospital when they met for lunch, but they had not made any plans for that day as far as he knew. About that proposal of yours, Sakura started in a low voice, deciding to go straight to the subject, and he immediately snapped to attention, looking at her carefully. It will be like flatmates only, correct? She asked almost hesitantly. Naruto felt a jolt. Was she agreeing? You trust me? He asked simply. Her eyes snapped at him. He did not even need to ask that question. She trusted him blindly. With her life. Do you even need to ask that? She replied. Then I give you my word that I would never cross any boundaries. She stared at him, his serious tone imparting his sincerity to that commitment, and she slowly nodded. Well, unless you want me to, he then added, a sly, teasing grin on his face, winking roguishly at her. She growled and rolled her eyes. Trust him to break a serious moment. Platonic flatmates, she said firmly, her eyes twitching, and he immediately chuckled nervously. Just teasing, Sakura-chan, you know that. I'm being thrown out of my apart. In 3 weeks, she informed him. I'll go to my parents in the meantime. We'll do a quick wedding, Naruto threw in smoothly. Shall we go for lunch to discuss about all this? He proposed, as they were still standing on the lobby of the Hokage Tower, and she acquiesced. So, once again Sakura find herself following her idiot of a friend in a reckless adventure, longer term this time, and once again, exultingly putting the what-ifs aside and letting it on him to deal with the consequences when they come. Chapter 2. It would be small, inconspicuous. Tsunade was happy beyond words. Of course I'll do it. It'll be our pleasure. She was purposely gruff, not wanting to show her immense emotions to the young Rokudime. Shizune nodded rigorously in agreement, smiling widely. Both women had been overjoyed when learning about Naruto and Sakura finally getting together, and now to be given the responsibility of organizing the wedding on the groom's side was an honor that touched them both deeply. It was 1 week since Sakura had accepted Naruto's proposal. They had made their engagement publicly known the next day, and since then, things had seemed to go berserk. The young Hokage could not help feeling overwhelmed with the whole thing. It seemed that the minute they had announced the news to the first person, Ino in this case, was the minute that the news had passed all over the Konoha grapevines, spreading like wildfire, and now the whole village was excitedly abuzz with the hot news of the Hokage being engaged with the head medic Nin. On a common accord, Naruto and Sakura had decided not to let anyone know about the true purpose of the marriage yet. If there was to be any major question from close friends, they would reconsider who to tell, deciding to play it by the ear and see how things went. But as it now, everyone had accepted their engagement and forthcoming, hurried wedding without even battling an eyelash, much to the surprise of the two. Their careful elaborated explanation of why the sudden rush to get married had not even been used, the common reaction being, it was high time, you too. Same as for their friends, the engagement had been readily accepted by the populace, and since the announcement, it seemed every single person the Rokudime had come across, from the youngest to the oldest, had been keen to offer the much abashed man their best wishes. The wedding date had been set in 1 month, on the first week of fall. 4 weeks did not leave too much time for a wedding preparation, but as theirs was going to be a simple, small wedding, the young man knew he could count on the former Hokage, with Shizune in the deal, to arrange for everything needed on time. Originally, he and Sakura had decided on a registration wedding, with Tsunade presiding the ceremony and some witnesses in attendance. It had seemed the best option, seeing the circumstance of this marriage, to have something with as little frills as possible. But that had been overlooking Sakura's parents' reaction to such idea. They had been scandalized that their only daughter would even consider robbing them of the happiness to do a proper, traditional wedding, as has been their words. And you are the Hokage, Sakura's mother had protested, looking at Naruto almost reproachfully, you surely cannot forego a proper wedding. Having been deeply relieved that the first obstacle, that of having her parents' approval, had been easily overcome, they had accepted the engagement and forthcoming marriage with sincere, obvious joy. Naruto had not want to rock the boat now by displeasing them about the ceremony. He had looked helplessly at Sakura, letting her take the decision. After some further pushing and guilt trips from her mother, Sakura had finally given in to her demand of a traditional wedding, with a firm compromise that it would be a small, inconspicuous ceremony. The young Rokudaime had in fact secretly quite liked the turn of events, before realizing that he had absolutely no idea how to organize a wedding. So, here he was, turning to the only mother figure in his life to request for her help. He sat crossed-legged on the porch of Tsunade's quaint house, with the two women sitting opposite him. You can leave everything to us, Tsunade said, assuring. Naruto grinned in heartfelt relief. Thank you, Oba-chan, Shizune-san. Please feel free to arrange for whatever will be needed, he requested both women. You can liaise with Sakura's mother in case you need to have something done with them. The former Godaime nodded. Don't worry, we'll see to every detail. It was the first wedding she would be preparing at such a personal level, and it touched her to the core that he had chosen her for the task. I want something simple, Naruto said. She replied absent-mindedly, her mind already sprinting ahead in all that needed to be done. They did not have much time and there was a lot to do. Not too big, and just a short list of invitee, he continued. The blonde woman stared at him, her mental planning scheme pausing momentarily. Just a short list, she repeated, deadpan. Yeah, just my friends, you know. A short silence lapsed. Just your friends, Tsunade said dryly, raising her eyebrows. She looked at Shizune, both women shared an incredulous and exasperated look. In Uzumaki Naruto's world, just friends had another meaning in another dimension, size-wise. Naruto did not notice her mocking tone, or the skeptic look that the two women shared. Let me know how much money you will need, he said. I'll give you the bill as we progress, Tsunade replied. She herself had put aside a small saving, always planning to gift it to him on such a day. It seemed it would be handy now, to cover the extras. Just some details we would need, Naruto-sama. Who do you intend to use as groomsmen? Shizune asked. And who would stand as your parents for the ceremonial rituals? The choice of parents was easy, but it was more complicated for the groomsmen. Naruto thought for a moment and groaned. Why do I need to choose a groomsman? He grumbled, confused as to whom he would ask from his group of friends. Tsunade smirked. You do know that you are allowed more than one groomsman. Naruto's face brightened at that. XXXXX, Ino, calm down. Sakura looked her 3.5-month pregnant friend in consternation. It was 2 weeks until the wedding, and Ino had marched in Sakura's office at the hospital, breathing fire. Forehead, I don't get you. We need to get your dress by now. The former Yamanaka, current Nara young woman almost screeched. I've already selected something, it's just a question of going to buy it now. Sakura protested. Ino, Tenten and Hinata had accompanied her for a preliminary shopping spree a week ago, and Sakura had set her eye on a simple yet elegant white kimono. Traditional white at the insistence of the girls. The salesperson had assured them that if there were any alterations to be made, he would be able to do it in one day itself, so she failed to see why Ino was so distraught. She was so overloaded with work at the hospital for the moment that she simply could not spare the necessary time to go for the purchase. That's it. You've liked one, you haven't bought it yet, nor asked the shop to keep it for you. Ino still thought that the kimono which Sakura had selected was too simple, but Sakura had refused to budge. But that was the least of the issue, the way the pink-haired was delaying, who knew whether she would still have a wedding dress. There's only 2 weeks left. And what if it's already sold out? The blonde was getting more agitated. I'm sure it has not been sold out. And please don't get in such a state, it's not good for you. Sakura chided. In times like this, Sakura wondered about the wisdom of letting her pregnant-induced emotional friend taking the harrying task of being her maid of honor. But it's not as if she had any choice anyway, Sakura thought ruefully. In fact, she had not even thought about having bridesmaids originally, being that the wedding was supposed to be a small, quiet one. But Ino had immediately popped the question of bridesmaids upon learning the forthcoming ceremony, putting the soon-to-be married girl in a corner. There had been no way to tell the young Nara woman that she had not been not considering having bridesmaid, and when Sakura had cautiously inquired whether with her pregnant state, wouldn't it be better for Ino not to be bothered by such a hassle, the blonde girl had threatened Sakura not to even think about not choosing her. From there on, Ino had sort of proclaimed herself as the maid of honor, and had taken to the role to the hilt. Sakura still felt astonished at how uncannily easily their coming union had been accepted by all their friends. Even Ino had not suspected anything amiss, which was unbelievable, seeing how the girl always seemed to detect the tiniest hidden secret. Free yourself after lunch, the pregnant young woman ordered impetuously. We are going to get that dress today itself. I can't, my grandmother has come to visit and Naruto is to come for lunch, Sakura almost wailed gloomily. Just as Sakura had been about to leave her parents' house for work that morning, a horse carriage has stopped in front of the porch, from which her grandmother, not forgetting the loads of huge trunks, had alighted, much to Sakura's dismay. The old lady had announced that she had come for the wedding, to Sakura's growing horror, being that the wedding was 2 whole weeks away. And she had immediately demanded to meet the future groom, accepting no excuses, least that she would march to the Hokage Tower herself to invite him in person. Sakura had precipitately deemed it much safer that she get Naruto in for the lunch. The pink-haired head medic Nin was definitely not looking forward to the coming 2 weeks. Being that she was staying at her parents' at the moment, there was no way to avoid her grandmother, unless she decided to sleep at the hospital for all the nights to come. I'll come to get you at mid-afternoon, then, Ino said firmly. I doubt that you granny would retain you for the whole afternoon. The shop was in the civilian area, closer to her parents' house, so it made sense that they met at Sakura's parents' house. No excuses, she rapped as Sakura opened her mouth. I can't believe how unconcerned you are. It was the same thing about the flowers, the decorations, and the cake. Sakura rolled her eyes at this. Her mother and Ino had teamed up and almost coerced her into leaving all the wedding arrangements up to them. Not that Sakura was complaining, work at the hospital was being incredibly hectic. What with the new batch of medics to be trained, she could barely spare the needed time for the preparation of the short-noticed wedding. So, she had gladly handed over the arrangement to 2 pestering, almost begging, overzealous women. Both had been so very obviously gleeful about her giving up the reign that Sakura had immediately put some strong warning in place. Simple, she had demanded, following her short list of invitees and family additions that her mother needed to make. She wanted it to be a small, intimate wedding, with an equally small reception afterwards, seeing the circumstances. Ino, that's why I feel lucky have you, the best organizer of Konoha, as my maid of honor, Sakura teased. Ino would have fussed whatever the situation. But please, stop stressing yourself so much over this, she reiterated, getting serious, otherwise Shika will kill me. Ino only huffed and stared at her friend with unhidden exasperation. She was very happy that the pink-haired and Naruto had finally crossed the step, but what puzzled Ino was that Sakura still looked the same as ever and nothing like a bride who would get married in a mere 2 weeks. Even her behavior with Naruto was unchanged. Then Ino shook her head and smiled ruefully, nothing surprising in that since Sakura had always acted like the possessive, nagging wife with Naruto, so now getting to be the official nagging wife did not make any difference. XXXXX. Some hours later, Sakura was prepping Naruto about the forthcoming meeting with her grandmother. Don't worry, Sakura-chan. Everything will be all right. He noted her tensed shoulders as they made their way to her parents' house. I'll put on my best behavior, he teased. Besides, she cannot be as bad as you are making her sound. She shook her head, lips curved downwards. My grandmother would make Ibiki-san look like a weakling in the advanced interrogation and information collecting area, she said gloomily. She will be sure to bully you to a maximum, grilling and prying at everything possible. Just be prepared. Hey, Naruto encircled her drooping shoulders with his arm with a cheerful smile. I'll be fine, really. Barely a while later, Sakura watched, jaw almost falling off, as Naruto worked his usual, uncanny magic on her tyrannical, prickly grandmother while they all sat for lunch. Now I can see from where Sakura-chan gets her temper, Naruto chuckled in delight as he teased the 70-year-old lady. Looking across the table at the animatedly chatting pair, the pink-haired sardonically wondered why had she, even for a second, worried about Naruto meeting the Haruno old matriarch. The two had gotten along instantaneously and was now interacting as if they've known each other for years, instead of barely an hour. Her usually grouchy, domineering grandmother was all smiles and heartiness. Sakura huffed inwardly. She should have known, who could resist the sunny Uzumaki Naruto, anyway. Her mother, on her side, fussed ceaselessly over Naruto, while her father looked on, an indulgent smile on his face, inputting some words in the conversation from time to time. Years ago, they had been a bit wary when Sakura had been placed in the Jinchuriki team, but with time, they had come to appreciate their daughter's dedicated teammate. They had always been aware of the protective streak that Naruto had for their daughter and had been secured in the knowledge that Sakura would always be in good hands with such a teammate. When Sakura had told them their engagement and their wish to get married, they had been genuinely happy, and they welcomed Naruto with open arms, as they were doing right now. Sakura felt a pang of guilt as she watched her parents' bright, happy faces. She felt deceitful. Then she turned her head to look at Naruto, who was grinning at something her grandmother was saying, and her heart lightened. She would do much more for him. As if feeling her watching him, Naruto turned his head to meet emerald eyes, a quizzical glint entering the cerulean orbs at her intense expression. Realizing that she was staring, she looked away quickly, feeling peculiarly flustered, and improvised a quick question to her father. So, I heard that you have a demon within you, Grandmother Haruno suddenly said loudly. Sakura whirled her head towards the old woman, eyes wide with anger. Oba-san, she burst out reproachfully, furious at her grandmother's tactlessness. A short, tense silence followed. It's okay, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, placating, but Sakura still glared angrily at her grandmother. She had not expected and would not tolerate Naruto being pried about his Jinchuriki status. She had not been aware that her grandmother even knew about it. Her parents stayed quiet, not knowing what to say. Sakura had warned them not to ever raise the subject with Naruto, and they understood and respected that request. But her grandmother was something else, as usual. I really don't mind, Sakura-chan, Naruto insisted as she was about to talk again, warm blue eyes reassuring the angry, disturbed emerald eyes, and Sakura reluctantly kept quiet. He could understand her family's concern. They were marrying their daughter with him, after all, and he guessed that they had not touched the subject at Sakura's demand. He turned to smile gently at the old woman. Yes, Oba-san, I hold the Kyuubi within me. But I would never let him do any harm to anyone, he told her quietly, least of all to my precious people. The blue eyes shone with an inner force and resolve that the old woman immediately recognized, and she did not need to hear more. She bowed her head at the young Hokage. You've got yourself a very fine man, she told a wide-eyed, surprised Sakura, while Naruto rubbed the back of his head, chuckling awkwardly, feeling embarrassed. Now, who would want a second serving of the rice cake? Sakura's mother broke in the silence cheerfully. Lunch was over and they were all relaxing in the sitting room when Ino and Shikamaru arrived. Stubborn, troublesome woman, sighed the Nara male after the general greetings, looking at his wife as Mrs. Haruno fussed over her, inquiring about her health and immediately starting with a string of advices to which Grandmother Haruno immediately added her own 2 cents. Shikamaru was not too happy about his wife running about for shopping sprees in her condition, but of course the stubborn woman would not listen to him. Just be sure you girls don't stay out for too long, he told Sakura quietly, away from the hearing of Ino. It's fine at this stage to have some exercise, Shikamaru, Sakura assured the worried father-to-be, but don't worry, I'll be very quick, she promised. I do hope we'll have similar good news soon in our family too. Her grandmother roared from where she sat, Ino seated beside her and looking intimidated. Sakura groaned in mortification, her face reddening, and she carefully avoided everyone's eyes. Upon learning that Sakura and Ino planned to go dress shopping, Grandmother Haruno authoritatively beckoned the 2 girls and Sakura's mother to her room. There was no question of not obeying the command, so the 3 women followed her, leaving the men to chat. The old woman bade Sakura to bring forward a huge trunk out of several which stood in the corner of the guest room before inviting the 3 to sit in a circle on her futon. Clicking open the numerous locks, she removed 3 large, flat, old-looking wooden boxes and deposited them carefully in front of Sakura. I've brought these for you, she told the young woman. They are your wedding gift from me. She nudged a first box towards the surprised pink-haired. Come on, open it, she said brusquely. Sakura carefully lifted the lid of the ancient-looking wooden box, to find a white, muslin cloth-wrapped parcel inside. With careful hands, she lifted the wrapped parcel and simultaneously, her mother and Ino shuffled closer, curious. They all seemed to be holding their breath as Sakura delicately unwrapped the parcel, then a collective loud gasp was expelled as a shimmering mass of beautifully gold-brocaded, champagne-colored silk was uncovered. With careful fingers, Sakura lifted what she soon discovered to be a stunningly beautiful kimono. This is a family heirloom. It was my mother's wedding kimono, grandmother Haruno said quietly. Sakura dragged her amazed eyes away from the kimono to stare at her grandmother. It was handed down to me, but it has never been worn. Your wedding seems to be the right occasion for something like this. Oba-san. Sakura started, feeling that it was not appropriate to wear such a precious and important garment for this temporary marriage. It did not seem right. I'm glad to be still alive to see you getting married, the last Haruno probably to be wedded during my living time, the old woman said gruffly. I know it's very ancient and most probably you would want something modern, but it would make me very happy to have you wear it. Sakura breathed shakily. Oba-san, are you sure? She asked, deeply touched. Yes, I am. It's just fitting to be yours, said the old lady. Considering that the kimono was almost a century old, it was still in excellent, new-level condition, the aged silk as solid as it is supposed to be, silk being reputed to be the best textile material to survive time. The lapels and hem of the wide bell-shaped sleeves were bordered with some elaborate embroidery of gold thread and beads which glittered with each movement. Wow, Ino said in a hushed, wondered voice. This is simply divine. They sure did things grandly in those days. Isn't it? Agreed Sakura's mother, as they touched the garment with respect and wonder. I would be honored to wear this, Oba-san, Sakura murmured finally, her throat tight with emotions, and her grandmother nodded, the old eyes crinkling with a smile. The second box contained the elaborated obi, made of golden shimmering silk, and a sheer, matching colored head veil with the same embroidered border as the sleeves, hem and lapels. The gasps were louder when they opened the third box to find the uchikake, the reception kimono, an astounding creation in a vibrant red brocaded silk, heavily embroidered all over with gold threads and vibrant colored beads, among which, pink beads forming sakura flowers. By the time they had finished exulting over the kimonos and the set of jewelry and hair sets which accompanied the garment, all the four women had moist eyes, emotions running high. Sakura hugged her grandmother. Thank you so much, Oba-san, she whispered. To think it took a wedding to get her grandmother and her to be the closest she had ever recalled being, Sakura thought. A while later, a still red-eyed Ino went to inform her very much concerned husband that the shopping trip had been cancelled. Concern turned to relief when learning that it was not for a life-death situation which would have brought about the tear red of his wife's eyes, just that the trip was not needed anymore. Naruto reread the scroll which he had received from Suna, brows furrowed deeply. It was from the cage, congratulating him on his upcoming wedding, which was just a mere 3 days away. Nothing unusual at that, the news must have traveled to Suna, but what attracted his puzzled attention was the positive presence written at the bottom of the card, mentioning that Gaara, his wife Matsuri, along with Temari and Kankuro would reach Konoha within the next day. A short while later, Naruto was found seated in the small living room of the Tsunade. You invited Gaara? He asked the older woman. Not that he was unhappy about it, on the contrary, he was very glad that his friend would be present. He was just surprised, it was supposed to be a small wedding, after all. Surely you did not intend to exclude him, not when he invited you to his own wedding, the former godime said in mild exasperation. You did say close friends, didn't you? She added with an innocent air. Yes, you are right, Naruto agreed slowly. It made sense, though the sneaky glint in the hazel eyes was making him wary. So, who else is coming that I should know about? He asked with the air of someone about to receive some fearful news. A short silence followed. Then, well, the Raikage and B-san are expected early on the wedding day. I received their reply some days ago. Oh, and of course the Mizukage will be here as well. And the Tsuchikage. Quote. You surely wouldn't want a diplomatic blunder by not inviting the other cages when you have invited the cage, would you? You shouldn't show political favoritism in such type of things. Naruto stared speechlessly at the blonde lady. The wedding was only 3 days away. Surely he did not need this now. XXXXX Sakura opened her eyes to the bright autumn sun filtering through the curtains of her window on the day which was to be her wedding day. She blinked, remaining motionless for a short instant, gathering her thoughts. Then, before she could get her brain to kick off, there was a loud, impatient knock on her door and the loud, cheerful voice of Ino resonated. Wake up, forehead, there's no time to laze around. The still bleary-eyed bride-to-be opened the door to her four chirpy, overly cheerful friends, Ino, Tenten, Hinata and Tamari, who, without waiting, immediately trooped in the room, all blabbering at the same about what needed to be done. The ceremony is still hours away. Sakura grumbled incredulously as she watched, impressed despite herself, as the young women started to unpack the bags they had carried with them, turning her bed and side table into a happy chaotic mess of jars and tubes and vials of stuff she could not even begin to know what it was for. You will not believe how the time will be short, Sakura, Tenten drawled while Hinata nodded in solemn agreement. Ino, 4 months pregnant, belly just having started to show, firmly pushed the pink-haired outside the room. Have some breakfast first before we get started, the Nara woman shooed her off. It was not as if she much say in the matter, thought Sakura, much to her chagrin, and made her way to the equally crowded kitchen, where her aunts and uncles and Kami knew who else busily bustled about. XXXXXX Naruto felt dazed, for once, unable to make his usual boisterous conversation, as he stood in the bustle of his room, people hurrying in and out, while a much calmer Shikamaru and Neji helped him to put some finishing touches on the complicated kimono, hakama and long haori set made in rich, navy-colored silk. I can't believe all the fuss that a wedding comprises of, Naruto said nervously. His house had been practically taken over by a crowd hours ago, the loud yapping of Akamaru only adding to the cheerful blustering about. On top of it, he felt quaky as he had no idea, literally, what awaited him. He had started to think maybe it had been a bad idea to leave Tsunade with such a free rein on the wedding preparation. It seemed that the former Godime had gone over the top, but had cheerfully avoided giving Naruto precise replies when he had asked about details. Shikamaru sighed. Be thankful that Sakura did not turn into a bridezilla, he said, whereas I got to deal with a complete maidzilla. Ino had been ferocious in the preparation of this wedding, which, added with her hormonal state, had made the poor Nara male wishing fervently for this day to be over so that he gets some peace back. Ready, Naruto? Iruka asked, appearing at the doorway. The former academy teacher, now headmaster of that same institution, looked very elegant in black kimono. He still felt surprised and immensely privileged at task given to him, that of representing the father of the groom, who would give away Naruto. Done, Neji replied, adding the last finishing touch of the groom's attire, a ceremonial sword sheathed at the side. XXXXX Naruto could hear the low hum of a gathering as the groom's party reached the village shrine. The high walls prevented him from having a visual on the court from which the hum was coming from, and the party was promptly ushered in the shrine building through a side door. When, a while later, Naruto appeared at the altar which faced the court, he almost fainted. The huge open-aired, florally decorated court, Ino's work, was filled to the pack with elegantly dressed guests seated in the traditional way on tatami mats, with the 4 guest cages seated on the front row. Considering the size of the place, the young Hokage estimated about 300, if not more, people there. A joyful cheer went up the crowd at the appearance of the groom, dispelling any solemn atmosphere which a wedding ceremony usually comprised of. Hokage-sama, don't faint on us, that's for the bride to do, a voice joyfully shouted as Naruto had paled, visibly very flustered. Naruto gulped and bravely smiled back at the crowd, raising a waving hand in greeting. His groomsmen took their respective places behind him. As Naruto had utmost difficulty from choosing from the group, finally, dressed in black formal kimonos, stood Sai, Shikamaru, Choji, Neji, Lee, Kiba, Shino and Konohamaru, 8 groomsmen. For once, Akamaru had been separated from his master, sitting with a forlorn air a distance from the altar. Tsunade and Iruka came to stand at the forefront, representing the parents of the groom. Iruka stood tall, intent on carrying out his part well, while Tsunade smirked at the astounded, questioning look that Naruto sent her. The priest stood on the side, silent and solemn. Shizune and Kakashi were the hosts and busy receiving and seating the still incoming guests. As Naruto scanned the sea of faces, occasionally waving his hand back to a greeting, he felt a pang when he could not see spiky black hair among the crowd. He had gone in person to invite Sasuke, and the Uchiha had bluntly told him that he was not sure to come. At Naruto's pained expression, Sasuke had grudgingly added, "It's not because I refuse the honor, it's just that socializing events and crowds are not my thing, you know that." He himself had a wedding of barely a handful of people in the Hokage's office. The admission had softened the rejection, but Naruto still felt saddened that the wayward member of Team 7 had not made an appearance. Asano, the 8-year-old son of Kurenai and late Asuma, and the ring-bearer, suddenly tugged his godfather's sleeve. "Not now, Asano," Shikamaru whispered at the corner of his mouth. The little boy had already been to the loo, twice. The little boy tugged insistently. "You really must retain it," sighed Shikamaru discreetly. "The bride is about to arrive anytime, we don't have time now." "Shikamaru Oni-san, it's troublesome," the little boy whispered back, "I think I've lost the ring." Shikamaru's eyes snapped wide. "What?" There was an urgent whispered discussion among the 8 groomsmen followed by an immediate scramble to find the ring. "What's happening?" hissed Naruto nervously, watching his groomsmen all practically on their knees. "Nothing, all's fine," quickly assured a nervously chuckling Kiba before discreetly resuming his careful sniff of the ground. But the ring had been handled by too many people, it was difficult to distinguish Asano's scent on the small metal, as he had been hoping to. "Everything's under control," laughed Konohamaru nervously at the increasingly frowning groom. "Neji, try your Byakugan," whispered Lee urgently. The Hyuga quickly nodded and activated his eyes. Sai, in meantime, had whipped out his sketch pad and paintbrush from under the lapels of his kimono and started to draw an army of mice. The vision of a flurry of mice scurrying among the assembly of guests, with the most probable result of a panicked, screaming mob, traipsing on the carefully and painstakingly floral decorations done by Ino, guaranteeing a mega meltdown and bashing of his maid Zilla and very much pregnant hormonal wife, flashed through Shikamaru's mind as he watched the artist about to perform the release jutsu. The Nara's eyes widened in panic. "Don't," he hissed, frantic, his Kajmane automatically having shot out to stop Sai from releasing the jutsu. "You want to create a total chaos or what? What's going on?" Naruto demanded more urgently now, looking at the hand and air-frozen Sai, the still sniffing Kiba, Lee, Choji and Konohamaru crouching low, Neji with his activated Byakugan, and were those bugs? Had Shino released his bugs? By the time, even Tsunade, Kakashi and Iruka was frowning darkly at the 8 groomsmen's strange, unacceptable behavior, while the priest was trying to politely ignore the strange occurrence. "What underscore? I think you are looking for this." Naruto jerked his head at the sound of the low voice, and watched, eyes widening, as Sasuke, dressed in a gray kimono, looking extremely ill at ease, walked forward to the side of the altar and discreetly handed something to Shikamaru. "I found it at the entrance," the Uchiha told the Nara in a quiet voice, before turning to nod at the now widely grinning groom. Sasuke. The blonde was beyond happy at the sight of his friend. Naruto. Naruto then realized that it was the wedding ring that Sasuke had given to Shikamaru. He glared incredulously at the group of groomsmen. "You lost the ring. These were supposed to be the top of the elite, the most powerful shinobis of Konoha, and they managed to lose a ring. What type of groomsman, 8 on top of it, can't even ensure that a single, mere wedding ring is safe," exclaimed Naruto indignantly. Konohamaru pointed accusingly at the little Asano, but Naruto cut his about-to-start explanation. "Asano-chan is not even a genin, and you are all above Junin levels." Said men hang their head, Sai finally released, Sasuke still standing on the altar, surrounded as he was by the ridiculously huge crowd of groomsmen, failing in his trying to edge away, while the groom continued his indignant grumbling. Naruto was cut in mid-tirade by the sound of the nuptial flute's music, which announced the arrival of the bride. The group of men immediately jumped back to place. Sasuke managed to discreetly escape but not before Naruto's mouthed word of, "See you later." Shikamaru pushed Naruto back to the front, to face the assembly and the bridal procession. Facing her, the blue eyes widened and his jaw slacked. She stood on her beaming father's arm, her mother and grandmother on the other side, the bridesmaids behind, but Naruto had eyes only for her. XXXXX Sakura felt her head spin at the sheer size of the crowd attending the wedding. Now she understood why Ino and her mother had been very vague when she had asked about the number of invitees which would attend. She was questioning her blind faith in having given carte blanche to the two, and in retrospect, knowing that Tsunade Shisho had been the one organizing on Naruto's side, she should have been alerted about something brewing up. The music started, her cue to start walking, and she quelled all thoughts about strangling the two sneaky women. It was too late to cry over spilled milk now. And to be honest, she was feeling too dazzled after hours of pampering, made up, hair done and wearing the astoundingly beautiful wedding kimono of her forebear. The dress was fit for a princess, and she felt like a princess, decked as she was. The girls had done an excellent job with her hair, a small part was gathered up her head in an elegant updo held by the antique decorative combs, while the remaining was left loose and some brought to one side, the luxuriant pink curls cascading down her front, some tiny daisies plopped randomly in the curls. The sheer, embroidered veil was secured on her head and left to flow freely at the back, grazing the floor as she took the tiny steps that the kimono allowed her to. Much to her relief, the girls had been light with the makeup, enhancing her features instead of covering them up. She could not help blushing at the admirative murmurs that rose up as she stepped into the aisle leading to the altar, and she instinctively tightened her hold on her father's arm. "You are doing fine," her father whispered soothingly. Sakura raised her eyes to look up at the altar and for one instant, she faltered. Emerald eyes met cerulean blue across the distance. She felt an involuntary shiver running through her whole being and everyone seemed to fade in the background as she looked at the tall, navy-clad man awaiting her. In another era, another life, her star-eyed, full of delusions, foolish 12-year-old self used to fantasize about a dark-haired, mysterious, aloof and brooding Uchiha Sasuke standing waiting for her at the altar. But the one actually standing there, waiting for her was someone who she knew as she knew herself, was all but dark, the bright, sunny blonde hair falling over the even brighter blue eyes that was so achingly familiar and his warmth reaching out to her even from the distance, tugging at something deep within her heart. The strength of her emotions shook her. Even if this was a blank marriage, she felt a wonderful warmth invading every core of her being. Unbidden, her lips tugged into a small, tremulous smile. Just looking at him made her feel stronger and her nervousness disappeared, and she stood straighter. Her father gently tugged his arm, indicating her to continue to advance. Naruto felt a sudden heat rushed through his heart and guts as their eyes had locked, then she had smiled. A small, soft smile. And he was bowled over. He watched the ethereal image walking up to him and was sent back to his little boy self, who had vowed to marry the pretty pink-haired, green-eyed girl. "Close that mouth," drawled Shikamaru in a low voice, eliciting some chuckles from the other groomsmen. Naruto's jaw had dropped so low that the Nara could see his full range of teeth. Those already married of the group felt reminiscent. They knew what it was to have the first glimpse of the fully decked bride, the magic, that gut-wrenching feeling, the breathlessness, so they were aware of what the young Hokage must be feeling right now, having already been there. Naruto gulped his mouth close and awaited with bated breath. The procession slowly approached, his attention focused on her alone, the small smile still floating around her lips as she finally reached the altar. Unable to help himself, he promptly leaned towards her as she made to stand by his side, facing the guests as per the tradition. "You are beautiful, Sakura-chan," he whispered, not low enough since the priest immediately cleared his throat, while the best men smirked. Gripped by a ridiculous shyness, Sakura felt her face warming up. "You're looking good too," she managed to whisper back an instant later, this time low enough that only the groom heard her. The ceremony went through a blur after that. The couple were purified, the sake drank ceremoniously, the vows pronounced in a solemn, subdued voice, a guilt running fleetingly through both, but strangely, despite that, all of it felt so queerly right that the flash was swiftly disregarded. Then the rings were exchanged, and the crowd cheered as the priest declared them husband and wife. When the couple emerged from the shrine a while later, an even greater crowd awaited them outside, cheering and acclaiming the newly wedded couple. Many, if not most, of the ladies were sniffing and wiping their eyes, Ino being in the top of the run. "What's wrong with women?" demanded Konohamaru, staring, utterly baffled, at the sniffling Moegi. "Weddings are supposed to be joyful occasion. It's a woman thing," Kiba said knowingly. "Apparently sniveling like this means they're having a good time. They'll be alright when they get some champagne inside them." That earned him a prompt whack on the head by the already hormonal-driven emotional Ino, and a sharp elbow jab from an equally red-eyed Sarah, his fiancée, typical Izunaka fiery temper running through her blood. "XXXXX, did you know about all this?" Sakura asked Naruto later, at sundown, as they stood, utterly dazed, in the huge white lavishly decorated marquee set up on one of the training grounds for the reception, watching the even bigger crowd than the wedding ceremony having a blast. The newly wedded couple made a breathtaking, striking picture. Naruto stood tall and very handsome in his navy wedding garbs, while Sakura wore the vibrant red uchikake over her wedding gown. The head veil had been removed to uncover her jeweled hair updo. No idea at all, Naruto chuckled. Tsunade had airily waved aside his concerns about the cost of all this when he had anxiously managed to slide the question earlier on. Most of it had been gifts, the older woman had told the young Rokudime truthfully. She had not been the only one to have been very willing to pitch in this wedding, much to her surprise. They sure went out of their way, Sakura smiled ruefully, watching her radiant mother, Ino, Shizune and Tsunade busying around, ensuring everything was fine, while all their friends circulated among the guests, taking the role of hosts dedicatedly. Let it not be said that Uzumaki Naruto was family-less, thought the pink-haired girl. Yeah, they did. Shouldn't we feel bad about all this? Sakura asked. Naruto grinned. Nope. Now let's go drink that champagne. With a flew he presented her with his crooked arm, cerulean eyes dancing at the beautiful emerald orbs of the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Let's hit the party, Mrs. Uzumaki. Sakura felt taken aback at the new name, being the first time she was addressed thus, then, grinning back, she took the offered arm. She was in no mood to delve deeply into things, the whole festive, surreal mood was simply too intoxicating. Everything would be fine, it always did when it involved him. Chapter 3 Sakura woke up from the dregs of sleep and looked around, wondering where she was for a minute. Then the past 24 hours flooded in her mind. Their wedding. It had been very late, near midnight, when the reception party had finally tapered down. Then, she and Naruto had been merrily pushed in a waiting horse carriage for a surprise honeymoon gift from the whole group of friends, another sneaky machination that the two had not been aware of nor expecting. They had not planned on any bogus honeymoon, the need of it being obsolete seeing the circumstances of the marriage, but it seemed that their friends had other ideas. The destination chosen had been the hot spring resort situated an hour carriage drive away from the village. Not wanting to create a fuss and resigned, the two newlyweds had decided why not accepting the well-deserved break and thus found themselves, 1 hour drive later, at the resort, with the honeymoon suite booked for them, room which obviously had only one bed. At Sakura's tired, questioning eyes, Naruto had immediately informed her that he would take the comfortable-looking couch. He had slept in much worse and it was certainly not the first time that they would be sharing accommodation like such. Exhausted and slightly boozed up, Sakura had been thankful that before leaving the reception, Ino had taken her to the private areas at the back of the marquee to get changed into a simpler, travel-friendlier dress. She would not have had the energy to get out of the complicated wedding kimono all by herself. She wondered, baffled, how any bride, in that matter, would have any energy left for anything else after such type of exhausting event that was a wedding. Ino had also packed some necessities for her, among which, to her relief, Sakura had found her own not-too-naughty nightdress, into which she changed after a quick shower. Naruto had not been in sight when she had emerged from the ensuite bathroom, most probably having left the room to give her privacy. The last thing she remembered was creeping under the blankets, after ensuring that she placed a set of blankets on the couch for Naruto, and she must have fallen asleep before he had returned. Said blonde was now nowhere in sight, and seeing the haphazardly folded blankets on the couch, she deduced he must have been up and about already. Judging by the intensity of the sun rays, it was quite late in the morning. Quickly going through her morning routine and getting dressed, again, all the necessary things having packed by a thoughtful Ino, Sakura went to look for Naruto. She found him meditating in the small attached garden, sitting cross-legged on the edge of a small pond. Not wanting to disturb him, she found herself studying him, the angle from where she stood offering his profile as perusal, his spine straight, head slightly bowed and eyes closed. Even seated and still, his body carried a lithe grace and power. She almost laughed aloud, to think that once he had been the clumsiest of all. The rush of emotions she had felt during the ceremony came to her mind, and she bit her lower lip, heart flipping and troubled, wondering at what sort of awkwardness and complications it would bring if let unleashed. Sakura-chan, you're awake. His cheerful voice broke into her worried thoughts and she looked at him as in a smooth movement, he stood up and bounced towards her. Let's go have some breakfast now, I'm famished, he urged. He was her usual, easy Naruto, grinning brightly, eyes clear and open as he reached her side and she breathed more easily. Chuckling, she teased him as he urged her forward towards the resort dining room. Always hungry. They were in the middle of eating when a figure blurred into view in front of them, it was an Anbu and both immediately tensed. I am deeply sorry for disturbing, Hokage-sama, Sakura-sama, he bowed and Naruto recognized him as one of his trusted staff attached to the Hokage Tower. You are needed in Konoha immediately. They learnt, to their distress, that there had been a failed attack attempt on the northern side of Konoha boundary. Naruto and his team had been anticipating and preparing for something in this direction, seeing that the 5 cages were reunited in Konoha, and he was aggrieved that their fear had been correct. At least the tightened patrol security they had put in place had worked, thus the failed attempt. Under normal circumstances, this sort of situation would have been supervised by Kakashi, to whom Naruto had left the temporary heading of his executive team, but since the other cages were still in Konoha, the situation had seemed politically sensitive enough for Kakashi and the others to have deemed it better for the Hokage himself to return. Naruto sighed. There went their break, it had seemed too good to be true. Duty call always came first, he had long realized as a Hokage. It was a good thing that this was not a real honeymoon, she could not help thinking, otherwise it would have been a huge downer. XXXXX Naruto sat at the kitchen table, taking his time sipping his tea after having finished his breakfast, while he waited for Sakura to eventually alight from her room. She had finished her shift very late the previous night, and today being her day off, she was sleeping in. He lingered, hoping she would wake up before he left for office, wishing to meet her at least before setting out for the day. It was going to be another cloudy day, he noted, looking through the wide glass bay of the cozy, full-equipped kitchen of the Hokage residence, the morning timid autumn sunrays barely piercing through the clouds. It was hard to believe that it was already 3 weeks since he and Sakura had been married. As he had foreseen, it had been easy to get adjusted to living together, them being so close and used to each other's way for so long, their cohabitation was going on without a hitch. He would say it was inherently easy, he and Sakura living together. He had been anxious about ensuring that she felt no discomfort and that there was no room for her to complain, so he put his all to make sure that things go as smoothly as possible. They had set some basic ground rules of cohabitation so that there were no hiccups, such as respecting each other's privacy and space bubble when needed. No barging in each other's room without permission. Having a proper time schedule of the use of the single bathroom of the upper floor in the morning, and being that most of the times it was Sakura who woke up earlier, she had the first use until a specific time. Cleaning after their own clutters in the common areas even if they had a kemi to houseclean, though not surprisingly, it was Sakura who very often found herself cleaning after him, which caused some scolding to ensure, sharing little tasks which was not for the housekeeper, like washing the dinner plates, and each responsible for their own laundry. All of it had oiled the living together. When Sakura had raised the question of costs, Naruto had been adamant of shouldering all the food expenses on top of the usual home expenses, despite her protests. The cost of one additional mouth is not going to make me go bankrupt, he had insisted stubbornly when Sakura had argued that she should at least contribute to the food finance, and she had to finally back off from his non-budging stance. The days following the wedding had smoothly fallen into a pattern, that is, as smoothly as their work schedule permitted them. The mornings, they would have breakfast together, before setting out for work. On very rare exceptions, as today or in case of an early morning emergency at the hospital, he would have breakfast alone, but till now it had been for only a couple of times. They had still kept their occasional morning sparring sessions and lunches together whenever their tight schedules allowed them, at Naruto's belligerent insistence. Living together did not mean that he would give up those, he had told her firmly. The rare late afternoons and early evenings when both of them managed to leave work early enough were spent together. Sometimes they would meet their friends, whoever was available, for a drink or simply hanging about, and, if the weather were still warm enough, they would stay out till later, or if the autumn cold and rainy weather forced them inside, they would be at home to do some chores which did not form part of a kemi's duties. Late evenings and dinners were mostly at home, both preferring to be in after a tiring workday, and Akemi's excellent cooking was always a good incentive to eat at home. The few exceptions were the times when they dined out, which was mostly on Akemi's one day off per week off. Then after dinner, they would lounge in the living room, either doing something together like playing some games, or Sakura would read her huge medical volumes or work on some reports while he would laze around, relaxing or dozing off, or in some cases, bug her just for the sake of it, before each of them would finally retire in their respective bedrooms. It had been a little complicated explaining the separate bedrooms to Akemi, and it would have been impossible to hide it from her. Sakura-chan works at such odd hours at the hospital, she needs her own room to rest when necessary, Naruto had told the housekeeper convincingly, telling the most plausible excuse he and Sakura had worked out. The elderly lady had clucked her tongue. "Youths of today," she had exclaimed, scandalized. In my time, it was unheard of that a husband and wife have separate bedrooms. But she did not push the matter further because she knew firsthand that the Hokage was in good care. She had herself been recruited by the young pink-haired medic Nin who had always ensured that the Hokage's well-being was well taken care of. Fiercely loyal as she was to the Hokage, it had never been a question on doubting Akemi's discretion on the separate sleeping arrangement. Being the Hokage, Naruto was mostly stationed within the village, and being the head medic Nin of Konoha Hospital and attached to the Hokage as his medic security when he traveled, Sakura rarely had out-of-village missions, thus their timetables were quite stable compared to the usual grueling schedule of most shinobis. All in all, things were good in the young Hokage's book. Naruto sighed contentedly. He loved, no, scratch that, he adored being married to Sakura. He adored that he no longer was the only Uzumaki, there were now 2 Uzumakas. Akemi's duty ending in early afternoon after she had prepared dinner, she had always been gone by the time Naruto returned home, and now he adored that the house no longer feel huge and dispiritedly lonely when he returned each evening. He had someone to look forward to return to. It gave him a thrill to see a second pair of feminine shoes next to his on the doorstep, instead of his only. He adored how he woke up each morning knowing that she slept so close and safe, only a few steps away in the next room. He adored how her things had been included around in the house, her comfortable green couch now sitting in the living room, some knickknacks and souvenirs on the fire mantel and on the coffee table, her toiletries arranged neatly on one side in the bathroom cabinet. It was barely 3 weeks since she's been here, but the feminine touch in the house was already discernible. Naruto was snapped out of his reverie when the one of his thoughts finally made her appearance. Good morning, Naruto. A visibly still sleepy Sakura walked in the kitchen, a wide yawn retained behind her hand, barefooted, wearing gray sweatpants and black fitted t-shirt, hair tied in a low-necked ponytail. Naruto beamed at the sight of her. Good morning, Sakura-chan, he chirped. Sakura blinked at the usual bright smile. Her eyes took in the sunny blonde hair and the sky blue eyes, typically projecting the image of warmth. Sunshine, thought Sakura, still groggy, brighter than outside, where the actual astral body was getting sparser as the season proceeded forward, she grumbled to herself. Bad night? He asked solicitously as he watched her rubbing the back of her neck tiredly. She replied. You've finished? She asked, glancing at his empty plate. Yeah, sorry, I have to leave soon, you were taking too long. It's okay, she waved his apology away as she started to gather her usual breakfast fare from the table, cereal, the jar of warm milk and a deep red apple. She rarely had the stomach for the full-course breakfast that Akemi prepared for Naruto. He pushed the teapot towards her as she sat opposite him, and she poured herself a piping hot cup of tea and sipped it with obvious enjoyment, her sleepy fog slowly clearing, as always, after her favorite morning must. I had an emergency operation late last night, she told him as she spooned some cereal in her bowl before pouring the warm milk over it and started to eat. Nothing too serious, I hope, he inquired. He's fine now. Broken femur. A Junin, returning from a mission. It was an accident, he slipped on a rocky cliff. The rain of the past days had resulted in tricky grounds. Oh, I'm sure I'll have the full report of the accident in my desk waiting. Yeah, at least it's something mundane as an accident, not an attack like the last time. He nodded. He and his team had been working assiduously on the attack on the morning of their wedding. The 6 Junins on patrol on the attacked area had not yielded much information for them to get along, apart from the info that it had been a group of 4 masked shinobis, who, as soon as they had started to be outforced, had retreated. The Junins had given a chase but the enemy had disappeared, leaving no trace. What are your plans for the day? He asked. It was her first day off since they had been married. Among other things, I'll have to go to the market. She had finished her cereal and reached for her apple, deftly started to peel the red fruit before cutting it into slices. We need to replenish the pantry, she said, slapping the sneaky hand which was trying to steal her apple slices from her plate. Prior to their marriage, it had been Akemi's task to go to the market, but Sakura had dispensed the housekeeper of that duty. She had always enjoyed the mundane activity of browsing through the market whenever her hospital schedule had allowed her, so she preferred to do it herself now. She had not had the time since the 3 weeks she had moved in, so today was the ideal day to see to it. Will you need more money? Naruto asked and she shook her head, again having to slap the offending hand away from her plate, but this time he managed to get the slice, as usual. He slid another apple towards her, though, and without battling her eyes, she started to peel the second fruit, while he snagged a second slice off her plate. I haven't yet used all from what you gave me, she told him. He had already handed her the home allowance for the month. She was already thinking ahead of her day. She had been thinking of giving Akemi the rest of the day off, meaning that either they would eat out that night or she would cook dinner, more opting for the latter. He waited for her to finish her apple, then stood up, feeling dejected. It was hard to go to work knowing that she would be free the whole day, whereas he would have to be cropped up in an office, the council elders having summoned him for what he knew was to be another lengthy, boring meeting. He picked up his Hokage robe from the back of his chair and shrugged into it. Well, see you later then, he said, and she smiled up at him. See you. XXXXX. Naruto felt utterly bored and itchy to get out of the room as he sit through a meeting with the two Konoha elders, listening with only half a mind to the droning discussion about finances and expenditures. Not that he was not concerned about the finances under his ruling, but this particular discussion he had already been gone through before and he was not about to change his mind. He had set a comfortable annual fund for the war orphans of Konoha and nothing the elders would say would change that. It was just his worst luck that when Kaharu Udatane and Homura Mitokado had been forced to retire from the council, they had been replaced with another equally austere and annoying pair of cronies, whose main aim seemed to be to undermine all decisions that the Rokudaime made. Life would have been much, much simpler without such types of elders in the council, thought the young Hokage, aggravated. Why should the hard-earned money be spilled in such way? Akio, the male elder, was saying. A quarter of what you are allocating should be enough. He was the one who had been most opposed to Naruto's ascending to Hokage, and the one to make most of the snide remarks about his unmarried status. Shikamaru, also present in the meeting being the main consultant and strategist of the Hokage's office, retained a sigh and looked at the young Hokage, feeling his irritation. His jaw clenched. Naruto gritted, I said this before, the parents of these children died for Konoha and the Alliance, consider it as a compensation for their lives given in duty. I won't change my stance on this. Our accountant assures us that the figure is workable, so he suddenly stopped in mid-sentence and froze, blue eyes suddenly taking a blank and faraway look. A silence lapsed while the other three people in the room waited for him to resume, then he unfroze. He suddenly stood up. I need to leave, he announced without preamble, to the surprise of his strategist and indignation of the pair of elders. What? The two old council members were clearly affronted at such a blatant disrespect from the Rokudaime. Naruto smirked, unaffected by their angry spluttered protests, and was already moving away. I think we are long done here, he threw over his shoulder. I have some important, domestic duties to carry out at the market. See you later, Shikamaru. He winked saucily at the couple who had been the hardcore in pushing him in a corner about his marital status, then in a blink, was off, leaving them in their outraged astonishment and own angry blunderings. Shikamaru stared at already retreating back of the blonde in exasperation, feeling a headache mounting. By the time the two elders had come to their feet, the young Hokage was long gone. It was not as if they could follow him as well, since the blonde had went through the window. Shikamaru sighed. Trust the Rokudaime to use the window as gateway. Market, huh? The Nara sighed again. Judging by the telltale frozen, far-away look Naruto had just before deciding to scamper off, Shikamaru deduced that a clone must have been dispelled somewhere, releasing its gathered information, most probably a spying clone. He further deduced that the Hokage's wife must be going to the market today. The Nara decided to be indulgent for once. He knew what it was to be newly married and wanting to spend all the time with one's other half. When he turned his head away from the window to look back into the room, he found himself at the receiving end of two pairs of furious eyes. Why was it that with the Rokudaime, he found himself too often left with the damage control? Thought the Nara in utter exasperation. Glad that the sun had finally, timidly come out, Sakura felt cheerful as she made her way towards the market, a big hamper bag dangling from her hand. She nearly reached her destination when she was halted by the sudden figure landing lithely beside her, maroon Hokage robes billowing about, spiky blonde hair falling over blue eyes. Naruto. She looked at him, startled. Sakura-chan. Nice weather for shopping, huh? Naruto grinned down at her, promptly taking her big hamper bag and nudging her to continue walking, his intentions clear. Sakura quirked an eyebrow at him. Don't you have more important things to do in the office? She questioned. He shrugged, nonchalant. Oh no, I was literally turning my thumbs in idleness, he said in a conspiratorial low tone, sending a silent apology to his strategist whom he had abandoned to manage the crisis he was sure to have left. Sakura threw him a disbelieving sideways stare. In the least, knowing how he always had a stack of unfinished report on his desk, being so closely similar to his predecessor in that area, she could hardly believe that statement. So you decided to roam about in town, she stated, deadpan. Yeah, it does form part of my Hokage duties, you know, he said solemnly, all innocent, while the blue eyes danced, to ensure that the people are doing fine, and help some damsel in shopping distress along the way. Sakura huffed and rolled her eyes, though she was happy for the company. Shortly, they reached the market. Said market was two parallel trails of canopy-covered stalls which went on for at least half a mile, amidst which shoppers and vendors alike bustled about noisily. Throwing themselves into the fray of bicycling men, hamper-carrying housewives, cane-supported grandmothers bent at the waist and young mothers towing clinging children, Naruto and Sakura got started. As soon as they stepped into the crowd, an immediate buzz went around, shoppers and vendors noticing that the Hokage and his wife were amidst them. Known by everyone as head medic nin and frequent shopper that she was, Sakura had always been greeted with respected familiarity by the merchants, same for Naruto, even though less frequent to the market than her since his ascension to Hokageship, he had always been cheerfully welcomed since the pain attack. But on that day, being the first time they were at the market since the wedding, the effervescence of the crowd was startling. Enthusiastic greetings erupted from everywhere. Hokage-sama, Sakura-sama. Playing his role of Hokage to perfection, Naruto took the time to greet each people, and while it still jolted Sakura to be addressed with the Sama title, she reasoned that she should get used to it as she greeted the people back and smilingly murmured thanks for the good wishes for their wedding. They tried to hurry through the crowd, their intended destination being the food and vegetables section, but they had first to walk through the non-perishable unit which consisted of everything imaginable, ranging from kitchen wares like pots and pans, to clothing and footwear, not forgetting handicrafts of all sorts. Soon, they were stalled by the swiftly accosting swarm of vendors, all haggling for the attention of the couple. Hokage-sama, Sakura-sama, please have a look at my handcrafted wooden figurines, one vendor eagerly invited. I sell the best knives of the country, another said. Not wanting to displease the merchants, Naruto took some time to politely admire their articles. A short while later, Sakura was getting impatient as Naruto spent yet another precious span of time lagging in front of a brightly colored kimono stall, while the vendor was earnestly trying to sell off his products to him. This one would look great on the lovely Mrs. Uzumaki, the man was saying, and Naruto looked at the indicated article, a vivid green and blue thing, with interest. Friendly and nice as they were, Sakura was used to the assiduous marketing of the people in here and knew how to politely but firmly refuse them, but Naruto was obviously gullible enough to fall for their buttering up as he seemed to seriously consider purchasing the thing. The kimono is very nice, but we are sorry, I don't need it, Sakura politely told the vendor before grabbing Naruto's arm and pulling him away. Come on, she urged the blonde in a low voice, intent on getting to the food area as quickly as possible. They are very adept at marketing their products, so be firm in refusing, she warned, otherwise before you know it you will find yourself loaded with a ton of unwanted things for the lovely Mrs. Uzumaki. She said the last part accompanied by an eye roll. Hey, Naruto protested, letting himself be tagged as she walked a step ahead of him, his eyes lingering with pleasure on the untied, visibly just washed long pink flowing tresses in front of him. Surely I can buy at least one thing for the underscore, his voice dropped an octave, underscore lovely Mrs. Uzumaki. Snorting, Sakura turned to look at him, expecting to see laughter on his face, but instead met serious cerulean blue eyes, a mysterious, intense glint alighting them. Sudden flustered green eyes stared at him a tad bit longer than necessary and she bumped into a passing shopper. Having no retort ready, she hurriedly turned her face away and fought down a blush, leaving the hold on his arm and speeding up her steps so that she was a few paces ahead. Hokage-sama, a petite, elderly woman practically threw herself in the couple's way and they had no choice but to halt. I would be honored if you would have a look at my sets of unique, lovely hair combs, all handcrafted by the best artisan of the 5 nations, the gray-haired woman effused, bowing her head at them. Once more, short of being rude, they could not ignore the vendor, so, a bit disgruntled, Sakura had no choice but to step beside Naruto as he walked to the designated stall. Politely, the couple stood as the woman enthusiastically displayed her wide, and they had to admit, stunning variety of ornate, jeweled combs. Naruto's attention was immediately drawn to silver one, mounted with two jade green leaves and a pink sakura flower at the center, some pearls randomly scattered around the setting. This one is pretty, he commented, pointing at it, and despite Sakura's discreet pull on his arm, he waited for the vendor to eagerly hand it to him. Yes. The colors would perfectly suit the beautiful Mrs. Uzumaki, the old woman immediately beamed. Naruto grinned. Yes. It will definitely suit the beautiful Mrs. Uzumaki. His voice was warm with an undercurrent of laughter, blue eyes dancing at the reddening said person. I'll take it, he told the happy vendor, and ignoring Sakura's whispered protests. Delighted at having been able to persuade the young Hokage to a purchase and seeing the way his beautiful wife was blushing, the old woman decided to be more forward. Here, why don't you put it your wife's hair yourself, Hokage-sama, she proposed, eager for some romantic excitement to break their everyday routine. Before a nonplussed Naruto or the confounded Sakura could place a word, a couple of voices had joined in. Yes, please do, Hokage-sama. It is said to bring good omen to a couple, a standing by woman pressed, immediately backed by a few others. By then, a small assembly of shoppers and vendors had gathered around, eager to watch the handsome Hokage getting a comb for his lovely wife. Naruto looked at a pink-faced Sakura, eyes questioning. Knowing they did not have much a gateway out of this unless disappointing some romantic housewives, who, in their own way, were only showing their support and affection for the Hokage, Sakura nodded and wordlessly presented him with the side of her head. Naruto shifted closer and rather clumsily, the strongest shinobi he may be but adept hairstylist he was not, gathered a thick strand of luscious, soft pink hair, as per the direction of the expert vendor and under rapt attention of their small gushing audience, his fingers brushing against her temple as he did so. Like this? He asked the vendor as he twisted the pink strand up, the sweet fruity scent of Sakura's shampoo waffling to his nose. The petite vendor nodded in satisfied approval. The graze of his fingers against her temple and scalp as he manipulated her hair caused her senses to sharpen more than necessary, and Sakura stood mouse still while he topped her, so close, by his nearly 1 foot in height difference, and he finally gently plopped the comb in place. There, it's done. He did not step back immediately, and a happy sigh rose from the small gathering. You make a beautiful couple. And isn't she lovely? Exclaimed the happy vendor. Naruto nodded, grinning. That, she is, he agreed wholeheartedly. Deciding that she had turned red enough for the day, Sakura quickly stepped away. Thanking the old woman, she turned to resume her trek towards the food and vegetables area while the small gathering dispersed. No more unnecessary stops now, she warned the still grinning blonde above her shoulder, a little more belligerently than she would have liked, as he followed her. A while later, though, Naruto stood practically drooling in front of a stand loaded with all ingredients needed for ramen, from the large variety of fresh noodles to the large assortments of trims that usually go with a ramen recipe. Sakura sighed exasperatedly. I said no more unnecessary stops, she reminded him. The hamper bag was already full with their shopping of the day, a wide assortment fresh greens, vegetables, and fruits, onions, rice, miso, pickled daikon, mushrooms, ginger, eggs, fresh fish, some meat. They were done and it was time to head out for home now. Sakura-chan, ramen, Naruto beseeched. Nope. She was not going to cook ramen for dinner. She already had her dose, 2 times since the beginning of the week, of ramen at Ichiraku to want to have the thing again for dinner tonight. Please. His stomach chose that instant to emit a loud growl and she stared at him. I'm hungry, he said defensively. Dinner is at least 2 hours away. You can prepare a pre-dinner meal. Sakura glared at him wordlessly. Look, everything's here, it's just a question of mixing all of them in a pot. As if it's as simple as that, baka. And you know I'm not so good at cooking ramen. Your ramen is always very delicious, Sakura-chan, Naruto lied manfully. Naruto. Green eyes glowered. Sakura-chan. Blue eyes coaxed. The sun was touching down when they finally left the market, the beautiful Sakura comb pinned in her pink hair, the hamper bag he carried bearing the additional load of a pretty bouquet of flower which one vendor had gifted them, and not forgetting the whole panoply of ingredients to make ramen for a pre-dinner meal, as he called it. To be continue.